Alright, my name is Vic Melenbrink. I'm a judge in Jefferson County, and I am going to show you how to do an asset division where both parties can end up with more than half of the assets, meaning a total of more than 100% of the assets. They'll both think that they ended up getting more of the assets than the other party, if you do it right. So let's see how this works. So first off, I've got some sample assets here. We've got a husband and a wife, H and W. Here's some assets, and we'll go through those values in just a second. I've got my blank template here. I'm actually going to duplicate that so I don't use the template. So we'll move that onto the end, and we'll rename this to be demo. Okay, so we've got our demo set up. Let's put our assets in. Grab those again and put them in there. Alright, so we've got Honda Pilot, Ford Explorer, a house, a condo, boat, ATV, camper, a wife 401k, and a husband 401k. The important thing is that prior to, starting this whole process, each of the parties would have gotten a list of the assets that need to be divided. And each of the parties, and here's the important part, without consulting with each other, has to come up with their valuations for each of those assets. So, for example, husband in our made-up situation values the Honda Pilot at $35,000. Wife values it at $30,000. Husband values the Ford Explorer at $18,000. Wife at $14,000. The house, husband at $325,000. Wife at $300,000, and so on. So they have different values for each of these assets, except for the last two. The last two are 401ks that are specific or determined asset amounts. So they each have the same. The wife's 401k is $60,000. The husband's is $90,000. There's no dispute about that. They value those equally because that's how much is in each of those accounts. All right, so once we have all these numbers and each of the parties have submitted their valuations for each of the assets, you put those in here, and the next step is to turn it into what I call percentage points. Essentially what you need to do is you need to take these values and convert them to a 100-point scale. So it's sort of like if each party had $100, here's how much they would have valued that at. So the way that you do this is you take the asset and you need the total. So to make a total in Excel, equal sign, sum, open parentheses, select the range, hit enter. And we're going to copy that, and we're going to paste it over here. So the husband's total valuation for all of his assets is $632,500. Wife's valuation for all of her assets is $613,000. I'll zoom in a little bit more to make that a little more clear. Okay, so overall, husband thinks the marital assets are worth $632. Wife thinks they're worth $613. So they're off by about $20,000. Husband thinks the marital estate's worth more than wife does. So what we can do is we can take this, and if your numbers look strange, I'm just going to change that to be a number, and we'll have 2 decimal points after it. So messed that up. Okay, so wife is going to change that to 13. Okay, so I want to show you what I did here. So the way that you determined the way that we determine this points for husband's Honda Pilot is it takes 35,000, cell B3, and divides it by cell B12, 632,000, and then we multiply it by 100. So 5.53, it's essentially 5.5% of the overall estate is how the husband values the Honda Pilot. Wife does the same thing. We take her valuation of 30,000, we put it over cell C12, which is her total amount, multiply that by 100, and it gives us 48 or 4.89. Now, one thing you'll note here is the dollar signs in front of cell C12, in front of the C and in front of the 12. What that means is that when I copy it and paste it, so that moved down one here to get cell C4 for the Ford Explorer's value, but it kept the C12 the same. So that makes it so that if I didn't do that, it would go down to this cell. So that's just kind of an Excel trick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of these cells, I'm going to drag it all the way down, and copy that and paste it all the way down. Obviously it's 100 and 100 down in the totals, so we don't need to do that. So here's the husband's distribution of his points. Here's wife's distribution of her points. And then I have what I call the point ratio, which is where I set it up to, it's a formula that I have here that essentially says how far apart they are on each of these values. So if they're close in the value, it's going to be closer to the number 1. So for these that are exactly the same, the point ratio is exactly 1. But for the other numbers where they have disagreements, this number, 1.083 for the house, that's because really from a percentage basis, they're pretty close on the value of the house. 51 versus 48, or 49. Whereas for some of the assets they're farther apart on, like the ATV, 5,000 versus 3,000, that's a pretty big difference. So that difference is, or that point ratio is 1.667. You don't really need to worry too much about that just yet, but I wanted to explain what the point ratio is. It's essentially how far apart are they on the valuation. Okay, so now that we've got our husband percentage points, here's his listing or weights, here's wife's weights. We need to get the initial calculations. So this is the sum of the values of the items that the party values equal or higher than the other. So here's what you do to figure that out. You go through each line, and I bold whichever of these points is higher. Whichever person weights this higher, they get a bold. So husband values the pilot higher because 5.53 is higher than 4.89. 2.85 higher than 2.28. That's higher. Wife's valuation of the condo is higher, 14.6 instead of 11.86, so she gets a bold on that one. Wife is higher, husband is higher, husband is higher. Now you might think, well, oh, and finally, oh, you know what, I messed up. On that one, wife is higher. Okay, so I just went through and bolded, and it might be kind of hard to see, so I'm actually going to make them italics as well, so you can see which person has the higher valuation. Now you might say, well, wait, how could wife and husband have different weights on the $90,000 and husband's 401k? Why does wife value it more? And the answer is because her overall value is slightly lower. So she views this $90,000 as being slightly higher as a percentage of the overall value of the estate than husband does. So that's why her weight is just slightly higher, 14.68 instead of 14.23. And it's the same thing for the wife's 401k. So now we have those weights. Husband has those 4 items valued higher, and wife has 5 of the items valued higher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out the total of the husband, the items that the husband has higher. So I'm going to type equal sign, sum, open parentheses, click, and then I'll hold control, click, click, click. So I've got those items, those go into husbands, and then for wife equals sum, hold control, click, 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 click. So if you add up all of husband's items, those add up to 63.24, and wife's add up to 40.95. Okay. So we've got our initial calculations set up. Now if we just gave each side the stuff that they value higher, that wouldn't be fair. Husband would end up with quite a bit more than wife in that situation. So our goal is to try to get both of these numbers closer together, and ideally over 50 each, because if they're over 50, that means that each party feels like they've gotten more than half of the assets. So we're done with step 1. We've allocated the assets to the higher valuing party. So let's go down to step 2. I'm going to delete these and bring step 2 up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these items, a whole set of stuff, I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it right there. So I'll have all this information. So what I need to do now is I need to sort by the point ratios. So I'm going to select all of this, starting up here with the point ratio. I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to go here to sort from smallest to largest. So what that'll do is that'll put everything in the order of point ratios. Because when I reallocate the assets, I need to start with the lower point ratios to equalize until the division is necessary. So since I'm going to be needing to give more assets to wife, I need to find the lowest point ratio, meaning the item that they're closest to in value, that is not going to wife. So wife's already getting her 401k, she's already getting his 401k, but she's not getting the house. So the house is the item that we have to divide, because that's the lowest point ratio item that is going to the person who needs to get more assets. So I'm just going to make this little notation here. We're going to divide that item. So I'm going to unbold and italicize that because it's back up for grabs, but I am going to bold and italicize the rest of it so we know which item is getting divided. The house is the item that gets divided. Everything else is going to stay with the person who values them more. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my pre-division calculation. So that's where I've taken out the item that's getting divided, and I'm going to essentially do the same thing I did up here, except it's going to take out that item. So wife's is going to stay the same because she didn't get the house taken out of hers. Husband's is going to change. So husband's, now he has equals sum. We're going to get the items remaining on husband's side. So his numbers are going to go down quite a bit. So since we took the house out of him, all of a sudden he's down to 11.86, whereas wife should stay the same with her 5 items at 40.95, just like she was before. So husband now is at a disadvantage, so he is going to be getting a bigger share of the house when we divide it to try and get that to equalize. Okay, so we're done with step 2. We've reallocated the assets and figured out which item is getting divided. Now, if we were in a situation where this was an item that couldn't get divided, if there was some other way to make it happen and we were going to try to keep the house together, or if it was for some reason an asset that can't be divided, we would just skip that one. We would leave it where it's at, and we would keep going through until we find an asset that can get divided. Now, in this particular situation with these numbers, it probably wouldn't work without dividing the house, but sometimes you tell the parties, hey, you two just don't have enough assets to afford to keep this house, unless you figure out something. So if you're leaving it up to me, I'm going to divide it. So that's what we're doing. We're dividing the house. The house is going to get sold, but we need to figure out what the percentage is. So moving on to step 3, I'll delete these items, or delete those blank lines, and we'll pull step 3 up. We need to calculate the division of the asset requiring division. That would be the house. So what we do is we're going to create an equation. The equation is going to tell us what the division is going to be of that item. So the higher value of the divided item goes on the left side over here. So who values the house higher? Husband values at 325, wife at 300, so the husband is going to go on the left because he's got the higher value. So we're going to change that to H, and then over here will be wife, wife. Okay, so we need to add up the total of husband's other stuff in points. So we're just going to hit equal. We're going to go up here, just say it equals that. So that's what it is. And then the divided item points equals, and then we're going to find the points the husband has for the house. So that's this right here, 41.38. So we'll just hit equals that cell. There we go. Now we're going to go to do the same thing on the wife's side. Wife's other stuff equals that right there, 40.95. And the divided item points, her points for the house, 48.94. So that's going to give us our equation. That's the equation right there. I'm going to type it in here just so you can kind of see how that works, although I'm going to move my screen over just a little bit to make that happen. So our equation is 11.86 plus, now we're going to do some algebra, x times 51.38 equals 40.95 plus 1 minus x times 48.94. Now that seems really scary, right? That's something that you probably haven't seen since high school algebra class. Essentially what it's doing is it's going to add two things on husband's side and two things on wife's side. On husband's side, it's adding his other stuff, 11.86, by the share of the house he's going to get, which is going to be x times 51.38. And then it's going to do the same thing for wife. It's adding 40.95 to her share of the house, which is 1 minus x, because 1 minus x is the remainder of the house's division, multiplied by her valuation of the house, 48.94. So essentially that's what's going on. So I've got my equation here. So right now you could, if you were feeling ambitious, either do this yourself or find your high school kid to do some algebra for you. But fortunately there's a website, Math Papa Equation Solver. So if you just Google this, you can find that equation solver. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to paste that in, hit calculate it, and now I have my result. Down the bottom, that'll tell me what x is, and x is equal to 0.7778. So I'll need those last couple of decimal points. 77.78%. That is x. So that number is husband getting 77.78% of the house. So this number here is just going to be 1 minus that number. So equals, let's type it, equals 1 minus, I'll just click on this number here, 22.22. Wife is going to get 22.22% of the house. Okay, so now that's what we needed to do. We know what item we need to divide, and we figured out what the distribution of that item is going to be. So theoretically, at this point, we've answered our question. Husband is going to get the Honda Pilot, the camper, and the Ford Explorer, plus 77.78% of the house. Wife is going to get the other stuff, both 401ks, the condo, the boat, and the ATV, plus 22.22% of the house. But we want to check our work, because they're not going to believe you. They're going to say, well, that doesn't sound right. How do you know that's the right thing to do? So we're going to check our work. That's step 4. So, husband assets. We're going to go through and we're just going to list each of the assets husband has. So, husband has, let's see, which items is he getting? He's getting the Honda Pilot. So I'm going to copy that, paste it. He's getting the camper, and he's getting the Ford Explorer. And the Honda Pilot is worth, and this is important, we're using his valuations. 35. He says the Honda's worth $35,000. He's getting the camper that he thinks is worth 22, and he's getting the Ford Explorer that he thinks is worth 18. Now to wife's side, she is getting her 401k. Oops. Let's zoom out to make it so I can fit everything at the same time. She's getting his 401k. She's getting the condo. She's getting the boat. And she's getting the ATV. And I have it set up here so she's getting, or sorry, husband, this right here, 77.78% share of divided item. If you want to make it nice and neat, you can change this in that formula, get rid of divided item, and just click on house. You can do the same thing here, get rid of divided item in the formula and click on house. So 77.78 share of the house, 22.22% share of the house. So that would be, here's where we need to do, his valuation of the house is going to go here. So that's that right there. Oh, move that over. There we go. So husband's share of the house, 77.78% of the house. So it's 77.78% multiplied by 325 gives you $252,785. That's what he thinks that 77.78% of the house is. Now let's do the same thing for the wife's side. Change that to $. On the wife's side, we need to put the assets in here. So we're using her valuations in the W column. $60,000 for her 401k, $90,000 for his 401k, $90,000 for the boat, or I'm sorry, $90,000 for the condo, $6,000 for the boat, $5,000 for the ATV. Okay? And then 22.22% share of the house, which is, fix that. All right, so it's 22.22 multiplied by her valuation of the house, 300. We'll change that to $signs here. So this over here is the total. So you can see what I did is I added up all these things. That gives me the total number of dollars. Husband thinks he's getting $327,785. Wife thinks she's getting, if you look at the sum here, $317,660. But here's the key. Let's see what the percentage is. So I'm going to hit equals 327 divided by his valuation of 632 is, make that a percent, 51.82%. Let's see what hers is. 317,000 is her valuation. Divide that by her total valuation, 613. Turn that into a percentage. So, husband thinks that he is getting 51.82% of the marital estate. Wife thinks that she's getting 51.82% of the marital estate, which, if you're bad at math, we're going to add those two numbers together. We have just created and divided a marital estate worth 103.64%, which seems impossible, but because of their differing valuations, we were able to divide it so each of them thinks that they're getting more than half of the estate. So that's pretty much it. We did step 4, our numbers check out. So the order would be that husband gets these items, plus 77.78% of the house's proceeds. Wife gets these items, plus 22.22% of the house proceeds. And that's what's in the order. And they get those items. They each think they won. So that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, Vic Melenbrink, Circuit Judge, Jefferson County. Have a great day.